What's up everybody, hello and welcome to Not Your Average Meta, an MTG Commander channel dedicated to bringing you decks and commanders you wouldn't normally find in your average meta. This week's video is brought to you by our channel sponsors International MTG on TCG Player, as well as Martin from the Hobby Horse. We've also started a new Discord channel which is free to join, so come hang out with us. Link in the description of this video. Will Foil continue his winning hot streak and win his third game in a row? Stay tuned to find out on this week's episode of Not Your Average Meta. This week's game features Martin back once again playing his favorite mono-white Griffin deck with Zeriam Golden Wind, Owen making another appearance on the channel playing his almost CDH deck using Old Stickfingers, Fallgirl playing his favorite Rule Zero deck featuring Witch-Maw Nephilim, and Foil back playing his own Rule Zero commander Rusko Clockmaker. Now that we're fighters, let's step into the Thunderdome and see which deck will come out on top. Turn 1, Owen plays an Underground Mortuary, surveilling one card, keeping it on top of his library. Fog plays a Swamp, while Foil plays a Tap Bazooka Bog, exiling Owen's graveyard. Martin plays a Plains and passes to Owen, who plays a Swamp for turn and then pays 2 for a Skull Prophet. Fog plays a Spire of Industry for turn, paying 2 for an Ornithopter of Paradise. Foil plays an Island for turn and then pays 2 for a Talisman of Dominance. On his instep, Martin pays 1 to cast Path to Exile, exiling Owen's creature. This then has Owen going into his library to get a land to put into play tapped when Martin untaps and draws for turn. Martin then plays a Plains and passes his turn to Owen, who puts into play his Tap Forest before untapping and drawing for turn. He then plays a Bayou for turn as well as a Mana Crypt before tapping out, casting his commander Old Stickfingers where X is equal to 4. He then reveals cards from the top of his library until he reveals 4 creature cards which he puts into his graveyard, while he passes his turn to Fog, who plays a Plains for turn. Owen then bottoms the rest of the cards that he revealed, and Fog taps out, losing a life in order to cast his commander, Witch-Maw Nephilim. On his instep, Foil pays 1 life in order to cast a Brainstorm, which has him drawing 3 cards and putting 2 cards from his hand back on top of his library. Foil then draws for turn and plays a Command Tower. Foil then taps out and casts his commander, Rusko, which has him entering play along with the Midnight Clock. He then pays 2 life in order to cast a Gataxian Probe, choosing to look at Owen's hand. He then draws a card and passes his turn to Martin, who plays the Plains for turn. He then remembers each of his opponents should have lost a life while he gained a life off of Rusko's ability. Owen rolls a dice on his upkeep, taking 3 damage before he then draws for turn. He then plays an Ancient Tomb as his land for turn before paying 3 for a Doomed Necromancer and then another 3 for a Basalt Monolith. Fog plays a Force for turn before paying 3 to cast Glunch the Bestower, which has him putting 2 counters on his commander. He then goes to his instep, choosing to use Glunch's ability to let Owen put 2 counters on his creature while he creates 2 treasure tokens and Foil draws a card. Foil plays an Island for turn before paying 4 for a Helm of the Host. This then has him gaining another life while each of his opponents lose a life. After this, Foil casts Snap, which has him bouncing the Necromancer back to Owen's hand and each of his opponents losing a life while he gains a life once again before he untaps 2 of his lands. Martin plays a 4th Plains for turn before tapping out in order to cast his commander, Zeriam. On his upkeep, Owen loses another dice roll, taking 3 more damage before he then draws for turn. He then plays a tapped Ebon Stronghold before paying 3 to recast his Doomed Necromancer. Owen then decides to go to combat, swinging his commander over at Foil, drawing First Blood with 6 commander damage. Fog plays an Opal Palace for turn and then pays 2 for a Poison Dart Frog, which has him putting 2 counters onto his commander. He then also casts a Stronghold Arena, putting 2 more counters on his commander before going to his instep, putting 2 counters on his commander, allowing Martin to draw a card and giving Foil 2 treasure tokens. Foil plays an Island for turn before paying to equip his commander with the Helm of the Host. He then goes to combat, triggering his Helm, which gives him another copy of his commander and has him enter with another Midnight Clock. He then casts a Mystic Remora, which this time has each of his opponents losing 2 life while he gains 2 life. On Martin's upkeep, Foil's clock goes off, which has him shuffling his hand and graveyard back into his library, while Martin plays a Griffin Canyon as his land for turn. Martin then goes to combat, swinging his commander over at Foil, which has him dealing 3 commander damage. This then has him creating 1 Griffin token before he then pays 4 to cast a Terramco Griffin. Foil then draws his 7 new cards while Owen rolls for his mana crypt trigger. Owen ends up not taking any life this time and draws for turn. He then plays a Swamp as his land for turn before using it to sacrifice his Necromancer, bringing Shieldred Whispering One back into play from his graveyard. Owen then casts Gerard Golgari Lichlord, and on his end step, Fog pays to cast a Generous Gift in order to destroy Shieldred. He then gives Owen a 3/3 Elephant token before he draws for turn and remembers to put 2 more counters onto his commander. Fog then pays to cast a Canker Bloom, which puts 2 more counters on his commander before he decides to go to combat. He then swings his commander over at Owen, who decides not to block, and he just takes 13 commander damage. This then has Fog revealing the top card of his library, which he then pays 4 life for in order to put into his hand. Second main, Fog decides to cast the card he revealed, which is Tacasia, which has him putting 2 more counters onto his commander. Fog then goes to his end step, putting 2 counters on one of Martin's creatures, having Owen draw a card while he creates 2 treasure tokens. Foil plays an island for turn before he then pays 5 for a Psychosis Crawler. He then goes to combat, which has him creating another copy of his commander and getting another Midnight Clock. Martin plays a Plains for turn and then goes to combat, swinging 2 Griffins at Foil while he swings 1 over at Owen. Both of them can't block and take the damage, which has Martin creating 3 more Griffin tokens. Martin then casts a Silverclaw Griffin before passing his turn to Owen, who rolls on his upkeep. Owen then loses and takes 3 more damage before drawing for turn. Owen then pays to cast a Necrotic Ooze before paying to cast an Ever After. This then has him choosing to return to play Shieldred Whispering One as well as Volrath the Fallen from his graveyard to the battlefield. On his end step, Fog chooses to use Tacasia's ability to have him tap some of his creatures in order to surveil multiple times. He then starts his turn, which has him sacking his Canker Bloom to Shieldred's ability. Fog then draws for turn before paying 4 to cast NYAM, Luminous Enigma, putting 2 more counters onto his commander. Fog then goes to combat, once again swinging over at Owen, who declares blocks, and in response to damage, Fog casts Blacksmith Skill, targeting his commander. This then puts 2 more counters onto his commander and gives him indestructible, allowing him to live while he wipes the board of most of Owen's creatures. Owen still takes 3 commander damage from the trample, which has Fog revealing the top card of his library before he then pays 3 life to put it into his hand. Fog then goes his end step, putting 2 counters on Owen's creature while Martin draws a card and he creates 2 treasure tokens. Foil also casts an opt on Fog's end step, which has each of his opponents losing 3 life while he gains 3 life, and he scribes 1 card to the bottom of his library before drawing. This then has each of his opponents losing a life off the Psychosis Crawler before he then pays to recast the Brainstorm. This then has each of Foil's opponents losing 3 more life, which has Owen getting taken out of the game, but with the card draw on the stack, Fog casts a Geist Wave to bounce the Psychosis Crawler back to Foil's hand. Foil then draws 3 cards while Fog puts 2 more +1/+1 counters on his commander, and Foil puts 2 cards from his hand back on top of his library. Foil then draws for turn and casts a Murkwater Pathway. He then casts a Soulrim before paying to recast the Psychosis Crawler a second time and then casting a Wonderphage. Foil then casts a Baleful Strix, which has him dealing 1 damage to each of his opponents before going to combat, creating another copy of his commander as well as another Midnight Clock. Martin plays a Windbrisk Heist for turn, hiding a card away underneath the land, while Fog talks Owen into subscribing to the channel. Martin then goes to combat, swinging 6 of his Griffins over at Foil, who decides to block 1 of them with his Baleful Strix. This then has Martin dealing damage with 5 of his Griffins, taking Foil down to 21 life and creating 5 more Griffin tokens. Martin then casts a Goldmane Griffin, and on his end step, Fog pays to use NYAM's ability, removing 3 counters from his commander. This then has him revealing the top 3 cards of his library before choosing to bring Canker Bloom back into play from his graveyard. He then uses his final treasures to crack his Cankerbloom in order to destroy the midnight clock the foil has and is about to go off. Fog then draws Return and casts a giant belt of strength, putting 2 more counters onto his commander. He then moves to equip the giant belt of strength onto his commander for 0, before then paying to cast Unnatural Restoration. This then has him proliferating the counters on his commander before he once again returns the Cankerbloom from his graveyard back to his hand. Fog then goes to combat, this time swinging his commander over at foil. Foil blocks with all of his available creatures, but still takes 12 commander damage and goes down to 9 life. Fog then reveals the top card of his library, paying 2 life in order to put it into his hand before it goes to his end step. He then chooses foil to put 2 counters on one of his creatures while Martin draws a card and he creates 2 more treasure tokens. Foil draws Return before paying 4 and casting a Damnation. In response to this, Fog uses Takase's ability to surveil 6 times, putting all the cards into his graveyard before the board then gets wiped of all the creatures. Foil then casts a Chasm Skulker and passes his turn to Martin, who just draws and recasts his commander a second time. Fog draws Return and then also pays to recast his commander a second time and comes into play with 2 counters on him. Foil draws and plays an island for turn before paying to equip his Chasm Skulker with the Helm of the Host. In response, Martin casts the Swords to Plowshares in order to exile the Squid, which has foil gaining 2 life. Foil then pays to recast his commander a second time, which has him coming into play with another Midnight Clock. On Martin's upkeep, one of Foil's clocks goes off while Martin draws Return and plays a Plains. He then decides to go to combat, swinging at Fog this time, which has his Griffin connecting, creating another Griffin token. Foil then draws a fresh 7 cards and Martin pays to cast a Charmed Griffin. Fog chooses to not put anything into play while Foil puts into play a Paradox Haze. Fog draws Return and then plays an island. He then casts a Drillwork Mole, putting 2 counters on his commander, before he once again casts Cankerbloom, putting 2 more counters onto his commander. He then also casts Solidarity of Heroes to put 2 more counters on his commander before he then doubles them and equips his commander with the Giant Belt of Strength. Fog then goes to combat, this time swinging at Martin, who uses his Griffin Canyon to untap his commander in order to block with all 3 of his creatures. Before damage, he casts Make It Stand in order to make his creatures indestructible, but still ends up taking 12 commander damage. Fog then reveals the top card of his library, losing 1 life in order to put it into his hand. Finally, he pays in order to use his Cankerbloom, and after some discussion with Martin, he decides to destroy the Helm of the Host before he then passes turn. On Foil's upkeep, he loses 2 life in order to cast a Vampiric Tutor in order to go get a card from his deck to put on top of his library. He then draws a card that he tutored for before playing an island for turn. He then recasts Psychosis Crawler once again before paying to cast an Essence Flux targeting his commander. This then has each of his opponents losing a life while he gains a life before his commander comes back into play and creates him another Midnight Clock. Foil then casts a Windfall, which has each of his opponents losing another life while he gains a life, before one of his clocks then goes off, having him shuffling his hand and graveyard back into his library. He then draws 7 new cards and deals 7 damage to his opponents off the Psychosis Crawler, taking Fog out of the game, before the Windfall then resolves, which has him discarding his hand and drawing 7 new cards, winning the game off the Psychosis Crawler. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe in order to see more games and decks you wouldn't normally see in your average meta.